I am Nadia. I am in my late 20s, and just a few short weeks ago, I sat on a hard wooden bench in a freezing courtroom and watched my own mother weep. She was not crying because she felt any remorse for what had been done to me. She was not shedding tears for the daughter whose future had been systematically dismantled. She was crying simply because a judge looked her dead in the eye and asked her a single, piercing question that she was entirely incapable of answering. My older sister stole my entire identity. She secretly opened nearly a dozen lines of credit using my social security number. She racked up almost $90,000 in fraudulent debt while I was exhausting myself, working endless double shifts at a corporate accounting firm, desperately trying to save enough capital to purchase my very first apartment. And when the mountain of lies finally collapsed and I discovered the absolute devastation she had wrought, my parents sat me down and instructed me to simply forgive her. "She is your family," they told me, their voices dripping with condescension. "You are young and capable. You can just pay off the debt slowly over the next decade." So, I walked out of their house and filed a formal report with the Financial Crimes Division of the police department. And at my sister's initial arraignment, my mother and father walked into that courtroom, took the witness stand, and actively testified against me under oath. They branded me a vindictive, jealous woman. They called me heartless and cruel. They desperately begged the presiding judge to let my sister walk away without consequence. The judge sat in silence and listened to every single word they said. Then, she adjusted her glasses, leaned forward, and asked them one single question. Just one. Before I reveal exactly what that question was, and how it shattered the artificial foundation of my entire family, if you find this journey of betrayal and survival resonates with your own soul, please take a moment to engage with this story. And if you are listening right now, drop a comment letting me know where in the world you are tuning in from and what time it is currently ticking on your clock. Now, allow me to pull you backward in time. Let me take you back to the sweltering desert morning when my cellular phone vibrated on my bathroom counter, delivering a digital notification that would permanently unravel every single illusion I held about the people who raised me. I have always possessed a natural affinity for numbers. It is the primary reason I pursued a career as a senior financial auditor at a mid-sized wealth management firm in a sprawling, sun-baked metropolis in the Southwest. It is the reason I meticulously track every single dollar I earn, every purchase I make, and every cent that electronically departs from my checking account. And it is the reason that, as I approached my late 20s, I boasted a near-perfect credit score and held a massive, hard-earned down payment in a high-yield savings account. I was living in a tiny, claustrophobic studio apartment. It was perhaps 400 square feet of worn beige carpeting, featuring a single, drafty window that offered a depressing view of a commercial dumpster and a cracked asphalt parking lot. But it was my sanctuary. It was paid for entirely with my own labor. I received absolutely no financial assistance from anyone. That is simply how my existence had always been structured. Growing up in my household, I was explicitly conditioned to be the easy child, the invisible one. My older sister, Juliet, required constant, suffocating attention. She needed endless reassurance, financial bailouts, and emotional rescue missions. Juliet is exactly 4 years my senior, yet somehow, she has perpetually remained the fragile infant our parents endlessly worried over. Juliet has an incredibly sensitive soul, my mother would frequently say, staring out the kitchen window with a look of profound concern. She simply feels the harshness of the world much more deeply than you do, Nadia. I learned at a terrifyingly young age that asking for anything for myself meant I was actively depriving Juliet of resources. So, I simply stopped asking. I fell completely silent. I funded my own university education through a grueling combination of academic scholarships, late-night waitressing shifts, and consuming nothing but cheap instant noodles for dinner 4 nights a week. Meanwhile, my mother and father seamlessly covered Juliet's out-of-state university tuition, paid the lease on her luxury campus apartment, and funded her vehicle insurance until she was well into her mid-20s. I never uttered a single word of complaint. What would have been the point of raising my voice? "You are so incredibly independent," my father told me once over a holiday dinner, phrasing it as though it were the highest compliment a parent could bestow. He spoke as if my fierce self-sufficiency was a natural personality trait I had actively chosen, rather than a heavy, iron armor I was forced to forge because no one was ever coming to protect me. I did not realize back then that my enforced independence made me the absolute perfect target. I did not comprehend that my quiet stoicism, my financial discipline, and my endless, uncomplaining capacity to handle the heavy burdens of life entirely alone had been meticulously noted, cataloged, and eventually weaponized against me. But I am getting ahead of the timeline. A month ago, I still naively believed that the concept of family carried a sacred weight. I believed that shared blood was a shield against profound betrayal. I was about to receive a masterclass in how entirely wrong I was. 2 months prior to the morning my world caved in, we gathered for a family dinner at my parents' sprawling suburban home. The dinner was entirely Juliet's idea. She had recently been publishing a series of overly curated posts on her viral social media accounts about the vital importance of reconnecting with one's roots, and my mother was absolutely captivated by the narrative. I drove nearly an hour through gridlocked rush hour traffic after finishing a grueling audit at my firm just to be present. I brought an expensive bottle of imported wine. I set the dining room table with the good china without needing to be asked. When Juliet finally breezed through the front door nearly 45 minutes late, as was her custom, my mother practically sprinted across the foyer to embrace her. "Oh my goodness, is that a brand new handbag?" my mother gasped, her eyes completely lighting up as she took in Juliet's appearance. I recognized the designer piece instantly. It was from a premium Italian leather boutique and had to retail for at least $800. "Sweetheart, you really shouldn't be spending your capital so frivolously if you are still struggling to make your rent," my mother chided, though her tone lacked any real reprimand. Juliet simply offered a bright, dismissive smile, casually tossing her perfectly styled blonde hair over her shoulder. "Oh, please do not worry about me, Mom. I have everything completely under control right now." Nobody at that table asked where I had purchased my practical, worn-out work tote. Nobody asked about my life at all. Throughout the entire meal, the gravitational pull of the conversation orbited exclusively around Juliet. We discussed her newly acquired job at a high-end cosmetic boutique, her sprawling new loft apartment downtown, and the endless, dramatic saga of her dating life. My mother leaned across the table, her brow furrowed with deep, genuine anxiety. "Are you absolutely certain you have enough liquid funds to cover your rent this month, my darling?" I attempted to interject just once, hoping to share a piece of my own joy. "I am actually in the final stages of saving for a down payment on a condominium," I said, keeping my voice light. "I should be completely ready to enter the real estate market in just a few short months." My mother offered a rapid, absent-minded nod, her gaze already drifting back to my sister. "That is very nice, honey. Nadia, would you be a dear and clear the salad plates?" Later that evening, as I was loading the dishwasher, Juliet cornered me in the kitchen. "Hey, do you think I could borrow your laptop for just a quick second? I desperately need to check an urgent email from work and my phone battery is completely dead." "Sure," I said, wiping my hands on a towel and handing over the machine without a single second of hesitation. She disappeared into the adjoining den for over 20 minutes. I thought absolutely nothing of it. Why on earth would I harbor any suspicion? She was my flesh and blood. I had no idea she was quietly, methodically scrolling through my saved desktop documents, accessing my secure cloud storage, and downloading the contents of a digital folder I had foolishly labeled as critical personal documents. I did not know that our pleasant family dinner was actually a reconnaissance mission. But the universe was about to force me to piece it all together. To fully understand the architecture of this betrayal, I must explain the era when Juliet and I actually cohabitated. About 3 years ago, shortly after I graduated from university and secured my accounting position, she found herself in desperate need of a roommate because she had burned bridges with her previous ones. I was desperate to split the exorbitant cost of rent in the city. It seemed like a logical, mutually beneficial arrangement. For 8 long months, we shared a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a bustling university district. And purely because she was my older sister, because I possessed a deep, ingrained, biological trust in her, I never bothered to hide anything. She had unhindered access to my incoming mail. She saw my bank statements sitting on the kitchen island. She physically held my social security card when I was sitting on our sagging sofa, filling out the endless mountains of onboarding paperwork for my new corporate job. "Hey, what is your social security number?" she casually asked me one Tuesday evening while filing her nails. "Why do you need it?" I asked, not out of suspicion, but mild curiosity. "I am currently updating the emergency contact protocols on my cellular family plan, and I want to add you as my primary backup." I rattled off the 9 incredibly sensitive digits without a single moment of hesitation. She is my sister, my naive brain rationalized. What is she going to do with it? Commit federal identity fraud? There were dozens of other seemingly innocuous moments scattered throughout our time together. Tiny, easily forgettable inquiries. "Hey, what was the exact zip code of our old childhood house on Elm Street? I need to list 10 years of residential history for a background check at the boutique. What is Mom's exact maiden name again?" I am filling out a family tree app and my mind is completely blank. "When exactly is your astrological birth time and date?" I want to input it into this new horoscope generator. I dutifully answered every single question. I freely handed over every microscopic piece of identifying information she requested, because that is simply what family does, is it not? You do not aggressively guard your personal history from your own blood. I was completely unaware that I was handing a master thief the combination to a bank vault, one number at a time. I was blindly building her a skeleton key, and I did not even realize there was a lock that needed protecting. 3 years later, I was about to discover the absolute devastation she had orchestrated using those tiny, innocent details. My phone was about to vibrate against the porcelain of my bathroom sink. A digital notification was about to illuminate the screen. And the entire trajectory of my existence was about to collapse like a fragile structure built on a profound, toxic lie. It was exactly 42 minutes past 7 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. The desert heat was already radiating through the thin glass of my apartment window. The notification popped up while I was brushing my teeth, preparing for another marathon day of corporate audits. Urgent credit score alert. A significant change has been detected on your file. I almost swiped it away. My credit profile never experienced significant fluctuations. I aggressively paid every single balance in full on the first of the month. I kept my credit utilization ratio under 10%. I executed all the boring, highly responsible financial maneuvers that absolutely nobody ever throws you a parade for. But some primal, twisting instinct deep inside my gut compelled me to tap the screen and open the application. The 3-digit number that slowly loaded on the display caused my hand to spasm, dropping my electric toothbrush directly into the sink. 412. I stared at the glowing red numerals. 412. That was mathematically impossible. Just 3 months prior, I had pulled a comprehensive report, and I was sitting near a perfect 800. A consumer does not plummet nearly 400 points simply because of a missed utility bill or a routine hard inquiry. A plunge of that catastrophic magnitude indicates total, systematic financial annihilation. My hands were violently shaking as I bypassed the application and logged directly into the primary credit bureau's secure portal to pull my full, unedited report. I scrolled down the page, my breath hitching in my throat with every line I read. Nearly a dozen premium credit cards that I had never applied for. 2 massive, unsecured personal installment loans that I had absolutely never authorized. Every single account was registered under my name, attached to my social security number, and every single one was either entirely maxed out or in severe, delinquent default. The total outstanding debt blared at me in bold, unforgiving text. $89,417. I slowly sank down onto the cold tile edge of my bathtub because the bones in my legs simply refused to support my body weight any longer. I recognized the names of the major financial institutions and luxury retail cards, but I recognized absolutely none of the account numbers. The oldest fraudulent account had been active for over 18 months. I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and dialed the first customer service hotline I could find on the report. The automated hold music sounded like a funeral dirge. When a representative finally answered, my voice sounded like it belonged to a terrified stranger. "There has to be a monumental systemic error," I managed to choke out. "I have never opened an account with your institution in my entire life." The silence on the other end of the line stretched out for an agonizingly long time as the representative typed. "Ma'am, our system currently displays nearly a dozen active and delinquent accounts secured under your verified Social Security number. They were all maintained in relatively good standing until roughly 2 months ago when the payments abruptly ceased. Would you like me to read you the primary billing address we have on file for these statements?" "Yes," I whispered, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. She proceeded to read an address. It was the exact street number, street name, and zip code of my parents' suburban house. The tiny bathroom began to violently spin around me. "Ma'am," the representative asked, her tone shifting to concern. "Are you still on the line?" I was physically present in the room. But the hopeful, trusting woman I had been just 10 minutes prior, the woman who genuinely believed that her family meant her no harm, she was already dead and gone. 5 grueling years. That is exactly how long I had been aggressively hoarding my capital for a down payment. 5 years of working 60, sometimes 70-hour weeks staring at spreadsheets until my vision blurred. 5 years of politely declining invitations to tropical vacations, skipping concerts, and denying myself every tiny, comforting luxury that makes the sheer grind of adulthood feel less like basic survival. Just the previous week, I had finally achieved my dream. I had been officially pre-approved for a substantial mortgage by a premier lender. My enthusiastic real estate agent had already forwarded me 3 incredible listings in a safe, quiet neighborhood. One of the units featured a stunning, sprawling balcony. A real, structural balcony where I could drink my morning coffee and watch the sunrise, not a rusted fire escape where someone had precariously balanced a dying potted plant. I called my agent later that very afternoon. The moment she answered the phone, her usually effervescent voice morphed into something incredibly strained and awkward. "Nadia," she started, taking a heavy breath. "I honestly do not know how to break this to you. The lending underwriter pulled your final, updated credit report this morning before closing the file. They have completely rescinded your mortgage pre-approval." "There has been a catastrophic mistake," I pleaded, pacing the short length of my studio. "I am fixing it right now. It is fraud." "I am so deeply sorry," she replied, her voice thick with pity. "But their corporate policy strictly dictates they cannot work with any applicant possessing a score below a 620. And your current file is showing a 412. A suffocating silence stretched between us. "I am so sorry, Nadia. Truly." I disconnected the call before she could offer any more platitudes. The beautiful apartment with the sunrise balcony evaporated into dust. The secure, independent future I had been meticulously constructing, brick by exhausting brick, had been completely obliterated overnight. Not because I had made a foolish miscalculation. Not because I was financially irresponsible. But simply because a person who shared my bloodline decided that my future was something they were entitled to harvest for their own amusement. I spent the next 8 hours locked inside my apartment, engaged in a grueling digital excavation. Utilizing security workarounds and enduring endless identity verification hold times, I managed to gain online access to several of the fraudulent credit card statements. The itemized transactions painted a vivid, sickening masterpiece of pure gluttony. Thousands of dollars spent at high-end cosmetic boutiques. Exorbitant charges at premium leather goods stores. A massive bill from a 5-star luxury mountain resort. First-class airline tickets for a weekend getaway to a notorious gambling city. Endless charges for high-end champagne brunches and exclusive day spas. Someone had been living an incredibly lavish, unbothered existence utilizing my pristine financial reputation as their personal slush fund. And every single charge, every single maxed-out limit, every single ignored billing statement, it all traced back to a single digital footprint and IP address originating from my parents' residence. I knew exactly who resided in that house. I knew exactly who perpetually lacked the income to support her champagne lifestyle. I knew exactly who had casually asked me for my social security number and mother's maiden name 3 years ago. but my mind still violently rebelled against accepting the truth. I sat hunched over my laptop as the sun went down, meticulously cross-referencing every single fraudulent transaction date with every digital footprint I could find. The timeline was utterly damning. An exorbitant charge at a premium department store on the 15th of March perfectly aligned with a social media post my sister uploaded on the 16th of March, featuring her twirling in a brand new, designer cashmere coat with the caption, "Always remember to treat yourself." A massive authorization hold at a luxury mountain resort in June perfectly matched an entire weekend of video stories she posted, showcasing herself sipping imported wine by an infinity pool overlooking a canyon. She had not even made a rudimentary attempt to conceal her spending. Why on earth would she? She operated under the arrogant assumption that I was so trusting, so deeply conditioned to never cause a scene, that I would never investigate her. But the specific transaction that permanently shattered something vital inside my soul was dated the 23rd of September. My own birthday. It was an authorization for nearly $4,000 at a highly exclusive Italian fashion house. I furiously scrolled back through my sister's photo-sharing platform until I found the exact post. A high-resolution photograph uploaded on the 24th of September. Her brand new, heavily branded designer handbag gleaming in the bright desert sun. "Sometimes a girl simply has to manifest her own luxury," the caption read, followed by a string of heart and shopping bag emojis. She had gleefully marched into a boutique and purchased herself a $4,000 handbag on the exact day of my birth, using stolen money that was legally attached to my name. Money that the banking institutions would violently pursue me to repay. I walked down to the cracked asphalt parking lot and sat behind the steering wheel of my modest sedan for over an hour. The engine remained off. The windows were rolled up tight. The lingering desert heat trapped inside the vehicle was suffocating, turning the interior into an oven, but I was completely paralyzed. A pathetic, terrified fragment of my inner child desperately wanted to be wrong. A part of me was already frantically constructing bizarre excuses to mitigate the pain. Perhaps she was in some sort of terrible, life-threatening debt and acted out of pure desperation. Perhaps she had a secret master plan to pay every single cent back before I ever noticed. Perhaps this was all just an incredibly convoluted misunderstanding that we would eventually laugh about over holiday dinners. But the dominant, rational part of my brain looked at the image of that $4,000 handbag and felt a dark, pulsing emotion that I had never directed toward my sister before. Pure, unadulterated rage. I realized in that sweltering car that I possessed exactly two choices. I could maintain my lifelong role as the silent martyr, pretend I did not possess the evidence, and literally pay for my sister's luxurious lifestyle out of my own pocket for the next decade. Or I could make the decision that would undoubtedly tear the entire fabric of my family apart. I reached out, turned the ignition key, and drove directly to my parents' house. Her pristine, luxury SUV was parked diagonally across the sweeping concrete driveway when I pulled up. Of course it was. I did not bother ringing the doorbell. I retrieved the emergency spare key from my keychain, the very key my mother had aggressively insisted I carry for unforeseen familial emergencies. This unquestionably qualified as an emergency. I pushed the heavy oak door open and found her reclining on the living room sofa, mindlessly scrolling through her smartphone. It was the exact same custom sofa I had helped my parents select and purchase 3 Christmases ago. She casually glanced up when I entered, a look of mild surprise crossing her features, but absolutely zero alarm. "Nadia, what on earth are you doing here on a weeknight?" I did not sit down. I did not remove my shoes. I simply stood motionless in the arched doorway of the living room and asked the singular question that had been burning a caustic hole through my chest for the past 12 hours. "Juliet, did you utilize my personal information to open fraudulent credit accounts in my name?" I watched her facial expression cycle through 3 distinct phases in the span of 2 seconds. Initial confusion, sudden, terrifying recognition, and finally, a chillingly practiced mask of complete innocence. "What are you even talking about? That is absolutely insane. Why in the world would I ever do something like that?" "The digital IP addresses originate from the router in this exact house," I stated, my voice devoid of any emotional inflection. The primary billing address on all 11 accounts is this exact house. The dates and locations of the luxury purchases perfectly match the timeline of your public social media posts. She blinked rapidly. She slowly set her smartphone face down on the glass coffee table and stood up. Okay, fine. Her tone abruptly shifted. The fragile innocence evaporated, replaced by a hardened, aggressive defensive posture. But you have to understand, I was fully intending to pay every single dollar back. $90,000, Juliet, I yelled, the magnitude of the number finally forcing its way out of my throat. You simply do not comprehend how incredibly difficult the economy has been for me lately, she shot back, crossing her arms over her chest. You maliciously purchased a $4,000 designer handbag on my actual birthday. You possess a highly stable corporate job. I possess absolutely nothing but stress. You easily could have offered to financially assist me, but you never once offered to help. I stared at her. I stared at the woman I had shared a childhood bedroom with. The woman I had shared my deepest adolescent secrets with. The woman I had fiercely defended to my own friends when they warned me she exhibited profound narcissistic tendencies. I did not offer to finance your life because you never possessed the courage to ask me, I said slowly. You simply decided to steal it instead. It is not considered stealing if we share the same blood, she retorted, lifting her chin defiantly. I heard heavy, hurried footsteps approaching from the kitchen hallway. My mother's voice, shrill and sharp with maternal concern, echoed off the vaulted ceilings. What on earth is going on out here? Why are you two screaming at each other? And just like that, the true confrontation commenced. My mother swept into the living room wearing her expensive gardening apron, the knees of her trousers still dusted with potting soil. My father trailed a few steps behind her, wearing his perpetual expression of cautious avoidance. What is all this horrendous noise about? My mother demanded. Juliet was already weeping. I had not even witnessed the psychological switch flip, but there it was in full display. Massive, glistening tears were streaming down her perfectly contoured cheeks. Her voice began to wobble and break with the precise cadence of a terrified, injured child. Nadia is aggressively accusing me of being a common thief, she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I am not accusing anyone of anything, I stated, maintaining my rigid posture in the doorway. I am simply presenting documented, financial facts. My mother immediately pivoted toward me, her facial expression instantly hardening into a mask of maternal judgment. Nadia, what exactly is the meaning of this behavior? I meticulously explained the entire catastrophic situation. I detailed the dozen fraudulent credit cards, the massive unsecured personal loans, the nearly $90,000 in accumulating debt, the digital IP evidence, and the itemized luxury transactions that fit my sister's curated lifestyle, like interlocking puzzle pieces. My mother stood completely still and listened to my entire presentation. When I finished, she slowly turned her head to look at her weeping eldest daughter. Juliet, she asked, her tone incredibly gentle. Is this information accurate? Juliet let out a performative sob and offered a tiny, pathetic nod of her head. I stood there, bracing myself for my mother's righteous outrage. I waited for the shock, the anger, the devastated realization that she had raised a criminal. Instead, my mother turned her gaze back to me, her eyes completely devoid of sympathy. Well, cannot you just quietly assist her in resolving this minor issue? The sheer audacity of her words struck me with the physical force of a closed fist. Mom, she actively stole my legal identity. She did not steal anything of the sort, my mother snapped, waving her hand dismissively. She simply borrowed your good standing without seeking prior authorization for 18 months. She is your sister, for heaven's sake. She completely destroyed my credit profile, I yelled, my composure finally fracturing. I completely lost my mortgage pre-approval today. I lost the apartment. Credit scores can easily be repaired over time, my mother countered calmly. There will always be other apartments on the market. I whipped my head around to look at my father. He was standing safely in the far corner of the room, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his gaze intensely focused on a blank patch of drywall somewhere just above my left shoulder. Dad, I pleaded, desperate for a singular voice of reason. He physically flinched at the sound of his title. He absolutely refused to meet my eyes. "Your mother makes a valid point, Nadia," he mumbled, his voice dripping with cowardice. "We should handle this unfortunate mistake internally, as a unified family. There is absolutely no need to escalate this and make it a bigger tragedy than it truly is." Juliet let out a loud, pathetic sniffle from the sofa. My mother immediately rushed to her side, sitting down and gently rubbing slow, comforting circles onto her back. I stood completely alone in the center of the living room I grew up in. I watched my parents actively comfort and protect the woman who had spent a year and a half living a life of absolute luxury using my stolen name. And in that precise moment of devastating clarity, I realized that I had never truly been a member of this family at all. I was simply an expendable resource. I decided to try one final, desperate negotiation. I owed my inner peace that much closure. "Fine," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "You explicitly do not want me to involve law enforcement? Then you are going to help me fix this catastrophe today." My mother looked up from stroking Juliet's hair, her eyes narrowing. "How exactly?" "We draft a legally binding payment plan. You, Dad, and Juliet will all sign a formal, official restitution agreement. We will drive to a bank and have it legally notarized today. Juliet agrees to aggressively pay back the entirety of the stolen funds over a set schedule. If she complies, I will not press criminal charges." It was an incredibly generous offer. It was far more mercy than she deserved. "We simply do not possess that kind of liquid capital to guarantee a contract like that," my mother stated defensively. "I am not demanding a lump sum payment today," I argued. "I am demanding legal accountability." Juliet's theatrical tears had miraculously vanished. She was staring at me from the sofa, and the look in her eyes was chillingly cold and calculating. "I am absolutely not signing a legal document," she stated flatly. "What happens if I lose my job and cannot make the monthly installments? You would undoubtedly use the contract to sue me." "You already owe the banks $90,000 in my name," I shouted. "I am actively trying to keep you out of a federal courtroom." Total silence descended upon the room. My father uncrossed his arms and shifted his weight from foot to foot. My mother's hand remained frozen on Juliet's shoulder. "So, let me ensure I understand the consensus," I said, pronouncing every single syllable with lethal precision. "Your unified solution to this crisis is that I simply accept the destruction of my future, and I personally pay for Juliet's federal crimes out of my own pocket for the next decade." My mother let out a long, exasperated sigh, looking at me as if I were a petulant toddler throwing a tantrum. "You will figure a way out of this, Nadia. You always do." Those exact words. "You will figure a way out. You always do." It was the toxic mantra of my entire childhood. It was the convenient, cowardly excuse my parents had utilized every single time they actively chose to prioritize Juliet's comfort over my basic needs. It was the precise reason I had spent my entire existence learning how to be fiercely, painfully self-sufficient, because I understood, even as a tiny child, that absolutely no one was ever coming to save me. I looked at my mother, whose face was a mask of cold entitlement. I looked at my father, who was still cowardly avoiding my gaze. I looked at my sister, who was already casually unlocking her smartphone screen as if this life-altering conversation was severely boring her. And I made my final, irrevocable decision. "You are entirely correct," I said, calmly reaching into my purse and retrieving my car keys. "I will absolutely figure this out. Just not in the manner you're hoping for." I turned on my heel and walked out the front door into the sweltering night, and I did not look back. Let me pause the narrative right here for just a moment. I genuinely want to ask you a question, because as I was standing in that suffocating living room, realizing with absolute certainty that the people who brought me into this world were never going to protect me, I felt a profound sense of isolation. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have walked away in silence and accepted a decade of financial ruin simply to maintain a toxic peace? Or would you have executed the exact plan I put into motion next? Drop your answer down in the comments. And if you are still walking alongside me in this story, please make sure you hit that subscribe button, because the absolute chaos that unfolds next is something even I could not have predicted. The very next morning, I walked into the corporate break room of my firm and confided in Julian. Julian occupied the cubicle 2 rows down from mine. Corporate compliance and contract law was his daily grind, but he had successfully passed the state bar examination several years prior. At that exact moment in time, he was the closest thing I possessed to trusted legal counsel. We sat in the sterile, fluorescent-lit break room while our colleagues ate lunch around us. I methodically laid out the entire nightmare. The dozen fraudulent accounts, the massive personal loans, the surreal confrontation in my parents' living room, and their absolute refusal to enforce any form of accountability. He sat there and listened to my entire monologue without interrupting once. When I finally ran out of breath, he slowly set his coffee mug down on the table. "Nadia," he said, his voice incredibly grave. "You need to understand that this is not a petty family squabble. This is aggravated identity theft. It is a severe federal crime." "I am well aware of that," I whispered, staring at my hands. She could theoretically face up to 15 years in a penitentiary for this scale of fraud. My stomach plummeted toward the linoleum floor. 15 years? That is the absolute statutory maximum, Julian clarified, leaning forward across the table. Realistically, assuming this is a first-time offense, the prosecutor would likely offer a plea arrangement involving heavy probation and full financial restitution. But you possess the absolute, undeniable right to press criminal charges. She is your blood sister, and she treated your future like a limitless ATM machine. He paused, looking deeply into my eyes. I have witnessed this exact scenario play out before. Individuals who steal from their own family members rely entirely on one specific psychological vulnerability, the assumption that family loyalty will prevent the victim from reporting them to the authorities. The very second you file that official police report, you permanently strip that power away from her. What if I am somehow making a mistake? I agonized. What if there is some bizarre, underlying explanation that I am failing to see? Is there? Julian challenged gently. I closed my eyes and thought about the router IP addresses, the matching shipping addresses, the boastful social media posts, and the $4,000 designer handbag purchased on the exact day of my birth. "No," I admitted softly. "Then you are not making a mistake." He pulled his smartphone from his pocket, rapidly typed something into the browser, and slid the screen across the table toward me. It displayed the direct contact information for the Municipal Police Department's Financial Crimes Division, alongside the portal for filing an official federal complaint for identity theft. "All the necessary evidence is already in writing," Julian assured me. "The credit bureau reports, the digital footprints, the chronological transaction history. The detectives will secure subpoenas for the remaining corporate records. You do not have to personally prove her guilt. You just have to hand them the puzzle pieces." I saved the phone numbers into my contacts. I did not possess the courage to dial them that afternoon, but I refused to delete them. That night, alone in the suffocating quiet of my tiny studio apartment, sleep completely evaded me. I lay in bed, endlessly scrolling backward through years of archived text message threads with Juliet. Decades of digital conversations. Trivial birthday wishes, forwarded internet jokes, and random, pointless updates about our daily lives. And as I scrolled deep into the archives, a terrifying, methodical pattern began to emerge from the screen. 3 years ago, mere weeks after our miserable stint as roommates ended. "Hey, what was the exact zip code of our old place in the university district? I need to list it for a mandatory background check at work." I had sent her the information without a second thought. 2.5 years ago. "Hey sis, do you happen to remember Mom's exact maiden name? My brain is totally blanking and I need it to fill out this weird banking form." I had quickly replied, "Williams." "Why do you need it?" She responded, "Just some annoying administrative stuff." "Thanks so much." 2 years ago. "What exact day is your birthday again? I want to make sure I send you a cute gift this year." She absolutely knew my birthday. She had been physically present for 25 of them. But I had obligingly typed it out anyway. September 23rd. And then the final, fatal message. Dated exactly 18 months ago. Merely 1 week before the very first fraudulent luxury credit card was opened in my name. "Hey Nadia, could you do me a massive favor and text me your social security number?" I am trying to add you as an authorized emergency user on my new cellular family plan. I scrolled down with trembling fingers to read my own response. The 9 most sensitive, guarded digits of my entire existence, sent directly to her phone accompanied by a smiling heart emoji. There you go. Thanks so much for adding me to the plan. There it was, documented in permanent digital ink. The precise moment I happily handed my sister the master key to my entire financial identity, completely oblivious to the destruction I was enabling. Security challenge questions, historical addresses, maternal identifiers, government tracking numbers. She had been aggressively, methodically harvesting pieces of my identity for years, patiently gathering the necessary ammunition, waiting for the perfect moment to pull the trigger. I stared at that specific text message for over 20 minutes. I had sent it. I was the architect of my own ruin. I freely handed her my social security number simply because she asked with a smile, and because I fundamentally trusted her. How on earth do you press federal criminal charges against a human being for utilizing the exact weapon you placed directly into their hands? You do it because the manner in which they wielded that weapon was a malicious, premeditated crime. I picked up my phone, dialed the number Julian had provided, and listened to it ring. The headquarters of the Financial Crimes Division was significantly smaller and more depressing than I had anticipated. It consisted of 3 battered metal desks, flickering overhead fluorescent lights that emitted a constant buzzing sound, and a water cooler bubbling loudly in the corner. Detective Eris Thorne appeared to be in his late 40s. He possessed short, salt and pepper hair and carried the specific, exhausted demeanor of a man who spent his entire career untangling the dark, greedy webs people weave around each other. He sat in silence and diligently took notes as I methodically walked him through the entire nightmare. I handed over the thick folder containing the ruined credit reports, the highlighted luxury transactions, the printed text message archives, and a detailed recounting of the surreal family tribunal in my parents' living room. When I finally finished my presentation, he leaned back in his chair and offered a slow, grim nod. This is an incredibly straightforward, highly documented case, Ms. Nadia. We will officially open an active criminal investigation today. How long will the entire process take? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. It will likely take a few weeks to formally gather the irrefutable evidence. We will need to subpoena the corporate banking records, legally trace the internet IP addresses, and verify the digital signatures on the original credit applications. He stopped writing and looked directly into my eyes. Are you truly, psychologically prepared for the cascade of events that will follow? What exactly do you mean? I mean that your sister will be formally arrested by uniformed officers. She will be criminally charged by the state prosecutor. This case will inevitably go before a judge. He paused, tapping his pen against the desk. Intrafamily fraud cases are notoriously difficult to prosecute. Victims frequently experience a change of heart. They succumb to family pressure and refuse to testify when the reality sets in. I will not experience a change of heart, I stated, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. I certainly hope you hold to that. He handed me a crisp, white business card. Call my direct line if anything concerning happens. And Ms. Nadia? You are absolutely executing the correct course of action here. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise. I walked out of the police precinct into the blinding desert sun, feeling simultaneously 10 pounds lighter and completely crushed by the weight of what I had just initiated. That evening, as I sat alone in my studio, I dialed my parents' home phone number. I felt I owed them the basic courtesy of a warning. I officially filed a comprehensive police report with the Financial Crimes Division today, I stated the moment the line connected. Against Juliet. The agonizing silence on the other end of the line stretched out for 3 full seconds. Then, my mother absolutely exploded. You did what? She shrieked, her voice reaching a hysterical pitch. I was left with absolutely no other choice, I replied calmly. You are intentionally attempting to send your own flesh and blood to a federal prison. I am simply reporting a severe financial crime. She is your family, Nadia. She maliciously stole $90,000 from my future. We raised you to possess a better moral compass than this, my mother screamed. You raised me to be a silent, compliant victim, I countered, my voice dropping to a freezing temperature. My mother's tone shifted from hysterical to absolutely lethal. If you do not contact that precinct and drop these ridiculous charges immediately, Nadia, you are permanently, irrevocably banished from this family. Do not ever contact us again. The line went dead with a sharp click. I sat in my parked car in the dim light of the parking lot, rested my forehead against the steering wheel, and wept with a profound, shattering grief for the first time in over 4 years. 3 days passed in absolute, agonizing silence. Then, my phone vibrated with a brief text message from my father. Emergency family meeting. Sunday at 2 p.m. We formally request your presence. I stared at the message for a long time. I almost deleted it and ignored the summons. But some pathetic, deeply buried fragment of my soul, the stubborn, childish hope that I simply could not manage to execute, thought that perhaps they had experienced a revelation. Perhaps the severe reality of a police investigation had finally forced them to recognize the magnitude of their beloved daughter's actions. I was spectacularly, painfully wrong about being wrong. When I unlocked the front door and walked into my parents' sprawling living room, it was not merely my mother, my father, and Juliet waiting to receive me. Aunt Helene was sitting rigidly on the love seat. Uncle Arthur was leaning against the fireplace. Grandmother Vera was positioned in the center of the room in her medical wheelchair, her lips pursed tightly in severe, generational disapproval. Even my estranged cousin Leo, whom I had not spoken a word to in over 2 years, was leaning against the doorframe. It was a formal, orchestrated tribunal. That was the only word to describe the gathering. Sit down immediately, Nadia, my mother commanded from the center of the room. Her voice was pure ice. I refused to move. I remained standing just inside the entryway. My mother rose dramatically from the sofa, addressing the crowded room. Nadia needs to explicitly explain to this entire assembly why she is actively choosing to destroy our family legacy. Aunt Helene was the first to attack. Juliet made a severe error in judgment, Nadia. We are all human. We all make terrible mistakes. Uncle Arthur chimed in immediately. Are you seriously attempting to ruin a young woman's entire life over pieces of paper and digital money? Money can always be replaced over time. Grandmother Vera struck her cane against the hardwood floor, slowly shaking her silver head. Back in my era, respectable families handled their dirty laundry behind closed doors. Involving the government in family business is an absolute disgrace. I slowly looked around the crowded living room. A dozen adults who shared my genetics. Not a single one of them was standing on my side of the battlefield. Juliet was curled up in the plush armchair situated by the bay window. Endless streams of tears were cascading down her face, while my mother kept a fiercely protective hand resting on her shoulder. She was playing her role flawlessly, the delicate victim, the fragile, misunderstood bird, the golden daughter who desperately required a shield. Just look at her, my mother demanded, pointing a trembling finger at my sister. Look at the absolute devastation you are inflicting upon your own sister's mental health. I did look at her. I stared directly into her weeping eyes, and I did not see a fragile victim. I saw a 31-year-old woman who had spent an entire year and a half aggressively, methodically stealing the foundation of my life without a single microsecond of hesitation or remorse. A woman who had eagerly purchased imported designer handbags, booked exorbitant spa weekends, and flown first class to luxury resorts while I was pulling back-to-back auditing shifts until my eyes bled. I am not the one who destroyed this family, I stated, my voice echoing clearly off the vaulted ceilings. Juliet accomplished that 18 months ago when she consciously decided that my financial identity was her personal playground. I am simply the individual who finally turned on the lights and caught her. Absolutely no one in the room offered a rebuttal. My father finally broke his cowardly silence. He had been standing quietly in the far corner, his arms crossed, staring intensely at the intricate pattern of the Persian rug. Nadia. His voice cracked with a pathetic weakness. Cannot you just find it in your heart to drop this entire investigation? Just do it for me. For me. He was not asking me to surrender my future for the sake of justice. He was not asking me to do what was morally right. He was begging me to absorb a $90,000 bullet simply so he would not have to endure the social discomfort of possessing a daughter who was a convicted felon and another daughter who aggressively refused to play the role of the silent victim. I looked at the man who had contributed half my DNA. I truly looked at him for the first time in my adult life, and he appeared incredibly small. He looked deflated, aged, and fundamentally broken in a manner that had absolutely nothing to do with my actions. "No, Dad," I said softly. "I cannot do that for you." My mother stood up to her full height, her face contorting with rage. "Then we have absolutely nothing left to discuss in this house. If you choose to walk out that front door today, Nadia, do not ever attempt to return. You are dead to us." The entire room collectively held its breath. A dozen pairs of judging, hostile eyes were locked onto my face, waiting to see if I would finally break and submit. I calmly reached down, adjusted the strap of my purse, and walked toward the exit. I paused with my hand on the brass doorknob and turned around to face the tribunal one final time. I have spent my entire existence playing the role of the invisible daughter, the one who never required attention, the one who figured out how to survive on her own, the one who stopped asking for help because I realized early on that it was never going to be offered. And I had quietly accepted that fate. My voice remained unshakably steady, betraying none of the absolute terror tearing through my chest. But I absolutely will not accept the burden of paying for a federal crime I did not commit, simply because the criminal happens to share my last name. I turned the knob, pulled the heavy door open, and stepped out into the blinding afternoon sun. As the door swung shut behind me, I heard my mother begin to wail. It was not the gentle, sympathetic weeping she performed to comfort Juliet. It was an ugly, guttural, terrifying sound. It was the sound of a matriarch realizing she had completely lost control of a narrative she had been meticulously directing for nearly 3 decades. I kept walking toward my car. I did not know that Sunday afternoon would be the absolute last time I would lay eyes on my family outside of a sterile courtroom environment. And I certainly possessed no idea that they were already aggressively plotting their next offensive maneuver against me. 3 agonizing weeks passed in total, suffocating silence. I received 0 phone calls from my mother, not a single text message from my father. Juliet aggressively blocked my profiles on every single social media platform, including my professional networking accounts, as if I would attempt to secure a corporate endorsement from the woman who stole my identity. I continued the mechanical routine of my life. I went to the accounting firm. I came back to my cramped studio. I obsessively refreshed my credit monitoring applications. And I waited in the dark. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, Detective Thorne finally called. "Ms. Nadia, the district attorney has reviewed the evidence. We possess more than enough documentation to proceed. They are formally pressing criminal charges." I slowly sank down onto the cheap linoleum floor of my tiny kitchen because my knees completely gave out. "What specific charges are they pursuing?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Aggravated identity theft, multiple counts of severe credit card fraud, and federal mail fraud because she intentionally redirected several of your physical billing statements to a post office box to conceal the paper trail." He paused, letting the heavy reality of the words settle into the silence. "She is facing a statutory window of 5 to 15 years in a state facility if convicted." 15 years, I repeated blindly, the number sounding absurd and surreal. "That is the absolute maximum penalty," Detective Thorne clarified gently. "Realistically speaking, assuming she possesses no prior criminal record, her defense attorney will likely aggressively negotiate a plea agreement. She will probably receive heavy probation, mandatory financial restitution, and perhaps hundreds of hours of community service." He took a deep breath. "But there is a secondary piece of information you need to be made aware of." "What is it?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. During the course of our extensive background investigation, my team uncovered a secondary victim. A young woman who briefly shared an apartment with your sister approximately 6 years ago. We found the exact same behavioral pattern. Minor credit cards opened in her name, small predatory loans taken out. But the roommate ultimately succumbed to pressure and never pressed formal charges. The kitchen floor felt as though it were physically tilting beneath me. I am not her first victim. No, Detective Thorne replied softly. You are simply the first victim who possessed the courage to refuse to remain quiet. I closed my eyes tightly, resting my head against the lower cabinets. All those years I had spent harboring a quiet, pathetic pride in believing I held a special place in her heart. I falsely believed I was the trusted younger sister, the one person Juliet would never dream of hurting. I was not special at all. I was simply the most convenient target next in line. A formal arraignment hearing has been scheduled for next Thursday morning, the detective continued, pulling me back to reality. You will receive an official summons to appear as a material witness for the prosecution. I have to publicly testify against her? Yes, but the initial arraignment is simply the formal reading of the state's charges into the public record. You will not be required to speak on the stand yet. You simply need to be physically present in the gallery. I thanked him for his diligence and disconnected the call. Next Thursday, in exactly 7 days, I would be forced to sit in a public courtroom and watch my flesh and blood answer for the absolute devastation she had caused. I was absolutely not emotionally prepared for the confrontation, but I would walk into that building anyway. The towering municipal courthouse was an intimidating structure composed entirely of sharp, unforgiving angles, polished marble floors, and blinding fluorescent lighting. I had meticulously armored myself for the occasion, wearing my most severe professional attire, a tailored navy blue blazer, a crisp, high-collared white blouse, and my hair pulled back into a tight, uncompromising knot at the base of my neck. The assigned courtroom was significantly smaller and more claustrophobic than I had imagined from television dramas. It featured dark wood paneling, incredibly uncomfortable wooden benches, a massive state seal mounted directly behind the towering judge's podium, a scattering of anxious strangers waiting for their own tragedies to be called, and a court reporter quietly setting up her stenography machine in the corner. I slowly made my way to the third row of the gallery. The designated witness section, the armed bailiff had brusquely informed me. I tightly clasped my trembling hands together in my lap, digging my fingernails into my palms to force them to stop shaking. Juliet was already seated at the heavy wooden defendant's table. She looked drastically, intentionally altered. She wore absolutely zero makeup. Her usually perfectly styled blonde hair hung limp and unwashed around her face. She was wearing a muted, oversized gray cardigan instead of her signature premium designer labels. Her defense attorney, a skeletal man possessing slicked-back silver hair, was leaning in close, urgently whispering something into her ear. She refused to turn around or acknowledge my presence. I simply stared at the back of her head and waited for the nightmare to begin. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a loud creak. I instinctively turned around, expecting to see another board attorney or a weary defendant. It was my parents. My mother was dressed in her conservative Sunday church attire. My father was wearing the dark, tailored sport coat he strictly reserved for weddings and funerals. They walked slowly down the center aisle of the gallery. For one brief, blindingly stupid, desperate microsecond, my heart leaped. I actually believed they had come to the courthouse to support me. They walked straight past my row without breaking stride. They proceeded directly to the front of the gallery and took their seats directly behind Juliet's defense table. My mother immediately reached forward over the wooden railing and gently squeezed Juliet's trembling shoulder in a show of absolute solidarity. My father offered a solemn, respectful nod to her defense attorney. Then, my mother slowly turned her head backward. Her eyes locked directly onto mine across the crowded room. Her facial expression was carved out of absolute, freezing stone. "All rise," the armed bailiff bellowed, his voice echoing off the wood paneling. The Honorable Judge Miriam Rostova presiding. A stern woman in her late 50s, wearing a flowing black robe and wire-rimmed glasses perched low on her nose, entered the room. She moved with the brisk, no-nonsense efficiency of a magistrate who had presided over 1,000 identical tragedies and possessed zero patience for theatrical displays. But she had absolutely not witnessed a spectacle quite like this one yet. She possessed no idea what my parents were preparing to orchestrate. And frankly, neither did I. The arraignment proceedings commenced with standard, Bureaucratic routine. The state prosecutor stood and formally read the severe list of federal charges into the public record. Juliet stood on shaking legs and entered a plea of not guilty, her voice sounding incredibly small, frail, and perfectly calibrated to elicit pity. The matter of bail was quickly discussed and established. Then, her silver-haired defense attorney stood up, straightening his tie. Your Honor, the defense has brought forward two vital character witnesses who humbly request the court's permission to speak briefly on behalf of the defendant's character before we proceed. They are her parents, Thomas and Sylvia. Judge Rostova peered over the rim of her glasses, glancing toward the prosecution's table. Does the state possess any objection to this unusual request? No, Your Honor, the prosecutor replied smoothly. Very well, the judge sighed. Mrs. Sylvia, please step forward and take the witness stand. My mother rose from the gallery bench and walked toward the elevated wooden witness box with the slow, reverent posture of a martyr approaching a holy altar. She placed her hand firmly upon the Bible, swearing a binding oath to tell the absolute truth under penalty of perjury. Then, she settled into the chair, adjusted the microphone, and looked directly past the judge, fixing her gaze entirely on me. My beloved daughter Juliet simply made a foolish mistake during a period of intense mental distress, she began, her voice echoing clearly through the courtroom sound system. She is absolutely not a hardened criminal. She is a fundamentally good, deeply sensitive girl who simply got in completely over her head financially. The state prosecutor remained seated in silence. This was merely an arraignment hearing, not a full jury trial. While character statements at this preliminary stage were highly unusual, they were not strictly prohibited by procedure. And Nadia, my mother continued, her voice suddenly shifting, hardening into a weaponized blade. Nadia has harbored a deep, toxic jealousy of her older sister since they were children. She is an incredibly vindictive person. She has always held dark grudges over the most trivial matters. I completely stopped breathing. The oxygen seemed to instantly evaporate from the courtroom. Nadia is maliciously utilizing this unfortunate financial misunderstanding as an opportunity to permanently destroy our family out of pure greed, my mother declared, her voice cracking with a perfectly timed theatrical sob. My sweet daughter Juliet absolutely does not deserve to have her entire future ruined and face a prison sentence simply because her younger sister is bitter and profoundly resentful. My father was called to take the witness stand immediately afterward. His prepared testimony was significantly shorter, but arguably even more devastating in its casual cruelty. Juliet was fully intending to pay every single dollar back, he stated confidently, gripping the edges of the wooden box. She explicitly told us so during a family meeting. Nadia simply refused to grant her a shred of grace. She maliciously bypassed the family unit and went straight to the police detectives without even attempting to discuss a civil resolution with us first. That was an absolute, verifiable lie. I had spent an hour begging them in their living room. I had practically begged them on my knees to help me establish a legally binding payment plan. But I was trapped. I could not scream. I could not object. Witnesses seated in the public gallery do not possess the right to interrupt sworn testimony. I was forced to sit in the freezing air of that courtroom, listening to my parents' toxic lies hang in the air like a poisonous fog, feeling the heavy, judging eyes of every single stranger in the room turn to look at me. I was the vindictive, unhinged daughter. I was the monstrous architect of my family's destruction. I was the vicious victim that absolutely no one believed. I must pause the story here. I desperately need you to fully comprehend the magnitude of the horror I was experiencing. The woman who birthed me stood in a court of law, placed her hand on a Bible, swore an oath to God, and publicly branded me a vindictive monster for possessing the audacity to report a catastrophic federal crime committed against me. A crime that resulted in nearly $90,000 of debt that I did not spend. My own mother. If you have ever experienced the soul-crushing sensation of being profoundly betrayed by the exact individuals whose biological imperative is to protect you, you understand the dark, suffocating abyss of this feeling. Please let me know in the comments. Have you ever found yourself in an impossible situation where your own flesh and blood actively chose to support your abuser? I genuinely want to read your story. And please, stay with me, because what the presiding judge said next completely changed the trajectory of my entire life. Judge Rostova had remained completely motionless and silent throughout the entirety of my parents' sworn testimonies. She had not interrupted them once. She had not raised a single skeptical eyebrow. She had provided absolutely no outward indication of what she was thinking behind her wire-rimmed glasses. Now, as my father slowly stepped down from the witness box and returned to his seat behind Juliet, the judge meticulously adjusted her spectacles and looked down at the massive stack of legal documents resting on her podium. She took her time. The courtroom was so suffocatingly silent that I could clearly hear the rhythmic, mechanical hum of the central air conditioning vents. "Mr. and Mrs.," she finally spoke, her voice breaking the heavy silence. "I ask that you both please remain standing in the gallery." My parents abruptly halted their movements, exchanging a rapid, confused glance. My father awkwardly reached out and grasped my mother's hand. "I have listened intently to both of your sworn testimonies." Judge Rostova's voice was incredibly measured, almost dangerously conversational in its tone. "You strongly believe that your daughter, Juliet, merely made a simple mistake and deserves the court's leniency. You strongly believe that your younger daughter, Nadia, is acting out of a dark, vindictive malice rather than a legitimate, legal grievance. Is my assessment of your stance correct?" My mother nodded her head with eager, desperate enthusiasm. "Yes, Your Honor. That is exactly the situation." I was not finished speaking, the judge snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. My mother's mouth instantly snapped shut. Judge Rostova looked back down at the thick prosecution file resting in front of her. I knew exactly what documents were contained in that folder. The ruined credit bureau reports, the IP address traces, the digital transaction records, the mountain of irrefutable evidence Detective Thorne had meticulously compiled. I see documented evidence before me indicating that nearly a dozen premium credit accounts were fraudulently opened. 2 massive, unsecured personal installment loans were executed. The total fraudulent debt equals approximately $89,000. She slowly looked up, her gaze locking onto my parents. "Every single one of these accounts was opened utilizing your daughter Nadia's stolen identity. Every single piece of banking correspondence was traced directly to your personal home address." Juliet was navigating a profoundly difficult mental health crisis. My mother started to interrupt, her voice trembling. "I did not ask you a question yet, madam," Judge Rostova stated, the temperature in the room dropping to absolute zero. Absolute silence reigned. The judge slowly closed the prosecution file, deliberately removed her wire-rimmed glasses, and folded her hands together on the polished wood of the podium. "I possess one single question for both of you." My heart completely stopped beating in my chest. The sprawling courtroom suddenly seemed to shrink to the size of a closet. Every single person in the room was entirely transfixed. The defense attorneys, the state prosecutors, the court stenographer, the armed bailiff, the anxious strangers waiting for their own cases to be called. Judge Rostova looked directly down from her elevated perch, fixing her intense gaze upon my parents, and asked the singular question that would permanently shatter the foundation of my family. Mr. and Mrs. Judge Rostova's voice was eerily calm, incredibly gentle, resembling the tone of a brilliant surgeon preparing to deliver a terminal diagnosis. "If you truly, deeply believe that your daughter Nadia is behaving vindicatively by reporting this massive crime to the authorities, if you genuinely believe that she should have handled this catastrophe privately, internally, within the confines of your family unit, then I desperately need to ask you both a question." The courtroom held its collective breath. At any point during the past 4 weeks, since the discovery of this devastating fraud, did either of you reach into your own pockets and offer to pay off the $90,000 debt that your daughter Juliet maliciously created in Nadia's name? The question hung suspended in the freezing air of the courtroom like a swinging executioner's blade. My mother opened her mouth to speak. Absolutely no sound emerged from her throat. My father stared fixedly at the scuffed wooden floorboards, his face burning a deep, shameful red. 5 agonizing seconds passed in silence. Then 10. Then 15. Judge Rostova simply sat there and waited, an apex predator watching her prey suffocate. My mother finally stammered, her voice a pathetic, broken whisper. She stopped. Her hands were trembling violently against her purse. We simply do not possess that magnitude of liquid wealth. I did not ask you if you possess the wealth, the judge fired back, her voice echoing off the walls. I asked you if you ever offered to take responsibility for it. Absolute silence. Did you offer to establish a legal payment plan with the banks? Did you offer to co-sign a consolidation loan to save her credit profile? Did you offer to liquidate any of your own assets? Did you offer absolutely anything at all to help rescue your daughter, Nadia? The daughter whose pristine credit was utterly destroyed, whose hard-earned future was stolen, whose very identity was hijacked without her consent. Nothing. A heavy, damning pause. Did either of you even bother to ask her how she was emotionally surviving this ordeal? My mother's face completely crumpled. The polished, self-righteous, Sunday church facade shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Tears began to stream down her face. And these were real tears. They were not the performative, delicately coached tears she had been instructing Juliet to produce. This was raw, ugly, humiliating devastation. My father still refused to look up from the floorboards. Your profound silence is officially noted for the record, Judge Rostova stated, sliding her glasses back onto her nose. You have stood in my courtroom and aggressively asked this court to demonstrate extraordinary mercy to the daughter who actively committed federal fraud. But I see absolutely zero evidence, none whatsoever, that either of you demonstrated a single ounce of mercy to the daughter who was brutally victimized. I sat in my rigid wooden bench, entirely surrounded by strangers, and I felt an emotion crash over me that I had not experienced in weeks. Absolute, pure validation. Someone finally possessed the power to see the unvarnished truth. My mother was audibly sobbing now. It was not the gentle, sympathetic weeping she utilized to comfort my sister. This was guttural, ugly, raw. It was the horrific sound of a manipulative woman whose mask had been violently ripped away in a public arena. I just desperately wanted to keep my precious family unified, she choked out between heaving sobs. Judge Rostova's facial expression remained completely impassive. Madam, a healthy family is not held together by violently forcing one innocent member to sacrifice their entire future to cover up another member's federal crimes. A family is held together by radical accountability, unwavering honesty, and equal, unconditional treatment. The judge slowly turned her commanding gaze toward Juliet. My sister had not moved a single muscle since the devastating question was asked. She sat completely frozen at the heavy defendant's table, her silver-haired lawyer's hand resting protectively on her forearm. She was staring straight ahead, her eyes completely vacant, appearing exactly like a woman watching her entire curated future collapse into ash in real time. Ms. Juliet, you have formally entered a plea of not guilty to these severe charges. However, the documented evidence presented to this court by the prosecution is overwhelming. Credit card applications directly traced to your residential IP address. Financial transaction records perfectly matching your public social media activity timeline. Archived text messages explicitly requesting sensitive personal identifying information from the victim. Juliet's defense attorney immediately stood up, attempting to interject. Judge Rostova sharply held up a hand to silence him. I am officially setting this case for a full criminal trial. The defendant will remain free on bail, subject to the following strict, non-negotiable conditions. An absolute no-contact order with the victim. Mandatory weekly check-ins with an assigned probation officer. And the immediate surrendering of her passport to the court clerk. She looked directly down at Juliet, her gaze piercing. Ms. Juliet, I strongly suggest you sit down with your legal counsel and seriously discuss the benefits of securing a plea agreement. The evidence compiled against you is incredibly compelling. The heavy wooden gavel came down with a resounding, final crack. This court is adjourned and will reconvene in exactly 6 weeks. As the armed bailiff loudly called the docket number for the next scheduled case, Juliet slowly turned around in her chair. She looked directly at me. Her eyes held absolutely no remorse. They held no shame, no guilt, no sorrow for the destruction she had caused. They held pure, undiluted, burning hatred. And in that chilling moment of eye contact, I realized a profound truth. My sister was absolutely not sorry for what she had done to me. She was only sorry that she had finally been caught. That was the precise moment I officially stopped grieving the loss of the relationship I thought we shared, because I finally understood that the relationship had never truly existed in the first place. Exactly 6 weeks later, facing the insurmountable mountain of digital evidence, Juliet capitulated and accepted a plea agreement from the district attorney. I was not physically present in the courtroom for the final sentencing hearing. My legal advocate advised me that my presence was not mandatory, and I was deeply exhausted from carrying the emotional weight of the ordeal. But Detective Thorne called my cell phone shortly afterward to brief me on the final details. She officially pleaded guilty to felony identity theft and aggravated credit card fraud, he informed me, his voice strictly professional. The federal mail fraud charges were dismissed as part of the negotiated plea agreement. What is her final sentence? I asked, staring blankly at the beige carpet of my studio. A 2-year suspended prison sentence. 5 years of intensive, supervised probation. 200 hours of mandatory, court-monitored community service. He paused, letting the silence emphasize his next words. And absolute, full financial restitution to you. The entire $89,000, plus legally accrued interest. She will be required to make strict monthly payments directly to the court until the balance is entirely zeroed out. I rapidly executed the brutal math in my head. Given her historical income level and complete lack of financial discipline, fully satisfying that massive debt would easily take her well over a decade, perhaps the rest of her adult life. What else does the agreement mandate? I asked. A permanent, legally binding no-contact order. She is strictly forbidden from physically approaching you, calling you, emailing you, or attempting to contact you through any third-party intermediaries, including your parents. If she violates any term of her probation, if she misses a single scheduled restitution payment, if she fails a random drug screening or check-in, the suspended sentence is instantly revoked. She goes directly to a state penitentiary to serve the full 2 years behind bars. He paused again. And her permanent record. She now carries a felony fraud conviction. It will appear on every single employment background check, housing application, and financial inquiry for the remainder of her life. I sat alone in my silent apartment, the phone pressed hard against my ear, desperately searching my soul to feel a specific emotion. I searched for a sense of triumphant victory, profound relief, or righteous justice. The only thing I could feel was a crushing, hollow exhaustion. Ms. Nadia, are you still on the line? The detective asked gently. Yes, I am still here. You executed the correct decision. I know with absolute certainty that it does not feel like a victory right now, but you did the right thing to protect yourself. Does the guilt ever fade? I asked, my voice cracking. Does it ever get easier knowing that you sent your own blood sister to? I stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Knowing that you reported your own family to the police? You did not send her anywhere, Ms. Nadia. Her own malicious, premeditated choices sent her there. Detective Thorne's voice softened, adopting a fatherly tone. Please take care of yourself. You have more than earned some peace. He disconnected the call. I slowly lowered the phone and looked around my tiny studio apartment. It was the exact same 400 square feet of cheap beige carpeting. It was the exact same drafty window offering a depressing view of the asphalt parking lot. But something intrinsic in the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. I was different now. The invisible chains had been severed. 3 days following the sentencing hearing, my cell phone vibrated with an incoming call. The caller ID displayed my father's name. I hovered my thumb over the ignore button. I almost let it ring through to voicemail, but some annoying, incredibly stubborn, resilient fragment of hope that I simply could not manage to extinguish compelled me to answer the call. Nadia. His voice sounded terribly exhausted, significantly older and frilier than I remembered. Can we please meet and talk? Just the two of us. I promise you, your mother will not be present. We agreed to meet at a small, independent coffee shop located exactly halfway between my apartment and their suburban home. Neutral, heavily caffeinated territory. He looked physically diminished in person. His shoulders were slumped, his posture deflated, looking exactly like a man who had slowly let all the vital air leak out of his soul. "I am absolutely not sitting here to apologize on behalf of your mother," he stated quietly, staring down into his untouched black coffee. "She is simply not psychologically prepared to admit her faults. Perhaps she never will be." "Then why exactly did you ask me to come here?" I asked, keeping my posture rigid and defensive. He finally lifted his head and met my eyes. "Because I know I should have spoken up. I should have intervened in the living room. I should have stood up and stopped the madness in the courtroom." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "I knew with absolute certainty that what she did to you was horrific. I knew that what we were demanding you accept was unconscionable. I was a coward. I simply did not know how to fix the broken dynamic of our household." "You did not have to fix the entire dynamic, Dad," I replied, my voice steady, but laced with a profound, unshakable sorrow. "You simply had to find the courage to stand next to me in the fire." Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. "I know," his voice cracked, a single tear escaping his eye. "God help me, I finally know that now." We sat together in that crowded coffee shop for over an hour. He never offered a full, complete apology. Not the comprehensive, soul-cleansing apology that my wounded inner child desperately needed to hear. But he finally acknowledged the reality of the trauma. He openly admitted that he had catastrophically failed his fundamental duty to protect his child. It was absolutely not enough to heal the wound, but it was a starting point. I firmly established my non-negotiable boundaries before I stood up to leave. I will absolutely not attend any future family gatherings, holidays, or events where Juliet is physically present. You are permitted to call my phone, but we are strictly prohibited from discussing her or her life. And Mom is permitted to reach out to me only when she is prepared to engage in a genuine, reality-based conversation, not a delusional fantasy where she defends a convicted felon or attempts to blame me for surviving. Those are my absolute terms, Dad. You can choose to accept them, or you can walk away forever. He nodded his head slowly, looking defeated but compliant. "Okay, I understand. I can abide by those rules." I drove back to my apartment alone in the fading evening light. One familial relationship was precariously salvageable. One was highly uncertain. And one was permanently, legally dead. That reality would simply have to be enough to sustain me. 6 months after the conclusion of the criminal trial, I walked to my mailbox and retrieved a standard government envelope. Inside was my very first official restitution check, issued by the county clerk's office. It was for the amount of $472. It was an incredibly pathetic, microscopic fraction of the massive fortune she owed me. But holding that thin piece of paper felt like holding a solid brick of justice. It was tangible, undeniable proof that systemic consequences existed in the universe and that malicious actions carried an inescapable weight. I immediately deposited the funds into my high-yield savings account and watched the balance incrementally grow. Through aggressive, relentless disputes and the submission of countless police reports, my ruined credit score had slowly climbed from the abyss of 412 to a recovering 580. It was still significantly bruised, but it was undeniably healing. Every single month, another fraudulent account was successfully expunged from my permanent record. Every single month, I was slowly, painstakingly reclaiming a stolen piece of my own identity. At my corporate accounting firm, something entirely unexpected occurred. The senior managing partner called me into her sprawling corner office. I walked in terrified, convinced I was about to be reprimanded for my declining productivity during the trial. Instead, she offered me a substantial, mid-year promotion. "I heard rumors through the grapevine about the extreme personal ordeal you recently navigated," she said, leaning across her mahogany desk. "I am not privy to the intimate details, and I do not want to be. I only know the broad strokes of the situation. But it requires an immense, unshakable reserve of personal integrity to aggressively pursue justice when your own family is standing in your way. I value that kind of iron integrity in my senior auditors." It was not truly about maintaining my integrity, I admitted quietly. It was purely about basic survival. In the corporate world, Those two concepts are frequently the exact same thing, she smiled warmly. Sometimes, the hardest choices yield the highest dividends. I received a significant salary increase, a new prestigious title, and a private office featuring a large window. It was small, but it belonged entirely to me. That beautiful apartment with the sweeping balcony I had originally dreamed of was long gone, purchased by someone else. But I eventually found another promising property. I am scheduled to close on a beautiful, quiet condominium in exactly 8 months. The down payment is nearly fully restored. I currently still reside in my tiny beige studio. I currently still meticulously track every single dollar that enters and exits my accounts. But the emotional weight of the tracking feels fundamentally different now. It feels significantly less like desperate survival and infinitely more like intentional building. Less like cowering in the shadows and more like reaching for the sun. I actively attend intensive trauma therapy every other week. I joined a localized support group specifically designed for victims of profound identity theft, meeting in a community center once a month. As it turns out, there is a massive, silent army of us out there. As it turns out, immediate family members are statistically the most common perpetrators of financial fraud. I was never uniquely cursed. I was never truly alone in my suffering. I simply had not possessed the knowledge of where to look for my community. One random Tuesday evening, as I stood in my tiny kitchen preparing a simple dinner for myself, I suddenly realized that I was softly humming a melody. I stopped chopping vegetables and stood completely still. I honestly could not remember the last time in my entire adult life that I had felt light enough to hum. Psychological healing is absolutely not a straight, predictable line. It is messy and chaotic. But I was finally, undeniably walking the path. People frequently ask me if I harbor any deep regrets. They ask if I regret aggressively pressing federal charges, permanently fracturing my extended family, watching my own mother weep uncontrollably in a public courtroom, and walking away feeling nothing but cold vindication. The honest, complex answer is that sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, I do. Some evenings, I instinctively reach for my smartphone, intending to text Juliet something incredibly stupid. A viral internet joke, a shared childhood memory, a highly specific question that only the sister I grew up with would understand. Then, the crushing reality of the restraining order and the betrayal hits me, and the agonizing absence tears open the wound all over again. I deeply miss the sister I falsely believed I possessed. I miss the loud, chaotic Sunday family dinners where I foolishly thought I belonged to a unified tribe. I desperately miss the comforting, warm fantasy of a family that would unconditionally prioritize my safety, even though I now fully understand that specific fantasy was never based in reality. But I absolutely do not regret choosing to save myself. For 27 years, I played the exhausting role of the easy daughter. The invisible ghost who never required resources or attention. The reliable machine who silently handled every crisis so that everyone else in the house was free to fall apart. That version of Nadia is permanently dead and buried. The woman I am today possesses unyielding, titanium boundaries. Clear, heavily enforced, non-negotiable boundaries. I refuse to share sensitive, personal information with any human being, family or otherwise, without a heavily documented, legitimate reason. I absolutely refuse to accept manipulative guilt trips as valid forms of communication. I no longer sacrifice my own mental or financial well-being simply so other people can comfortably avoid the consequences of their own actions. And I will never again confuse the concept of unconditional love with a demand for unlimited tolerance of abuse. My mother stood in a courtroom and confidently declared that I destroyed our family. Perhaps, from her distorted perspective, she is correct. But here is the profound truth I have discovered in the wreckage. If a family unit only manages to stay intact because one specific member is continuously forced to agree to be destroyed, then it was never truly a family in the first place. It was a parasitic system. And I was simply the load-bearing wall. The exact moment I refused to carry the crushing weight of their dysfunction anymore, the entire structure collapsed into dust. But that structural failure is absolutely not my fault. That is simply the undeniable law of physics. So, if you are sitting there watching this video and you have ever found yourself forced to make the impossible, agonizing choice between maintaining a toxic peace and preserving your own self-respect, I desperately want to hear your story. Please drop your experience down in the comments section. We are all navigating this dark, confusing journey together. And please remember this absolute truth: you are fully permitted to stop volunteering to be the easy target. Before I conclude this story, I want to share a vital piece of wisdom I uncovered during my intensive therapy sessions. My trauma counselor asked me one afternoon why I believed Juliet committed such a profound atrocity against me. I quickly replied that she was inherently selfish, pathologically greedy, and fundamentally a terrible human being. My therapist slowly shook her head. Your older sister is not a cartoon villain representing pure evil. She is simply a profoundly broken human being, broken in a highly specific, systemic way. Here is what I have finally come to understand about my family dynamic. Juliet was assigned the role of the golden, fragile child. She was so heavily shielded and enabled by our parents that she never possessed the opportunity to develop a distinct, resilient identity of her own. Our parents aggressively protected her from the consequences of reality to such an extreme degree that she completely failed to learn how to process failure, navigate disappointment, or handle adult responsibility. When the realities of life became too heavy for her, she possessed zero healthy coping mechanisms. She relied on compulsive shopping. She relied on absolute psychological denial. And ultimately, she relied on harvesting me. She stole and utilized my identity because she fundamentally lacked a cohesive identity of her own. That psychological explanation absolutely does not make her actions acceptable. It does not magically make the destruction of my life forgivable, but it makes the architecture of the crime understandable. And me? I was designated as the invisible, capable child. The one who internalized at a terrifyingly young age that my emotional and physical needs simply did not matter to the group. I learned that asking for assistance was a completely pointless endeavor. I was taught that total, isolating independence was the mandatory price I had to pay just to survive in that household. I freely handed Juliet my social security number because I had never been taught that I possessed the fundamental right to say no. I was never taught that I could say no to anyone, especially not to my own flesh and blood. So, here are the final, enduring lessons I desperately want you to extract from my survival story. First, profound trust must always be actively earned through consistent behavior. It is never to be automatically granted. Sharing a biological bloodline absolutely does not guarantee psychological or physical safety. Second, the individuals who loudly accuse you of being dramatic, vindictive, or difficult for establishing healthy boundaries are almost exclusively the exact same individuals who are actively benefiting from you possessing absolutely none. Third, aggressively protecting yourself from exploitation is not a betrayal of your family. It is not an act of cruelty. It is the most basic, fundamental act of human survival. You are fully, legally, and morally allowed to aggressively refuse to be used as a resource. You are allowed to look people in the eye and say no. You are entirely allowed to walk away and permanently sever ties with individuals who only view your existence as a tool to be harvested. Even if those specific individuals raised you from infancy. Even if those individuals share your exact genetic code. Even if those individuals try to manipulate you by calling their abuse love. That is the truth of my story. Thank you for listening to my voice. Thank you for staying with me through the darkest chapters of this journey. If any fragment of this narrative resonated with your own lived experience, if you have ever felt completely invisible in your own home, or had to execute an impossible, agonizing choice between keeping a false peace and preserving your own soul, I promise you I see you. Please share your story of survival in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And if you desire to hear more stories of resilience and justice like this one, please hit the subscribe button and check the description box for related videos that will speak to your heart. Please take aggressive care of yourself out there in the world. You absolutely deserve peace.